Hi everyone, today I'm going to be making some cinnamon rolls. I'm going to walk you through step by step so it's super easy. These are the best cinnamon rolls I've ever tasted, and I'm not even just saying that, so I hope you guys enjoy them as well. We're going to start off with yeast. I have the jar of yeast because I've been making these so many times, but if you just have a packet, you're going to use one packet of instant yeast, or you can use 2 1/4 teaspoons yeast from the jar. I always try to make 2 batches of these at once because they're just really good and we like to share them with neighbors and friends and stuff. So I'm going to just be showing you one at a time, but if you want to have extras, which I definitely recommend for the week or to share, just make 2 different bowls of the yeast starter. So after you get your yeast in there, you're going to add in about 1 teaspoon of sugar. This is a really important step because without the sugar, the yeast doesn't activate. So make sure you don't forget to add in your sugar. And you're just going to add that right in with your yeast. So here we go.
Erase card thing and erase.
Okay, now you're going to need to heat up some milk and water. You're going to need about 1/4 cup of milk. You can use any milk. This time I use dairy milk because we get a free 1% fat milk from our WIC. But usually we drink oat milk. So if I don't have my WIC milk, well, I'll use oat milk, and either way it's come out delicious. So you add 1/4 cup milk and 1/2 cup of water to a measuring cup or a bowl, and then you're gonna microwave that I did mine about 30 seconds, and when I took it out it wasn't completely warm enough because I got water from the fridge, so I did another 15 seconds and it was perfect. So you want this about lukewarm. You don't want it scorching hot and having it burn and kill off your yeast, but you don't want it cold so it doesn't activate. So just lukewarm. And then you pour that in and whisk together with your sugar and yeast mix. Make sure you mix that in real well so you don't see the little yeast pieces anymore. And then you're just going to set that aside for about 5 to 10 minutes to let it activate until you see the foamy top to the yeast mixture. If you can see here, I have 2 bowls going, so that's my second yeast mix that I have set right here. And now you're going to need 2 tablespoons of butter. For this part, for the dough, I like to use unsalted baking butter, like these sticks like I have right here. You can use salted butter if you want. I usually use the salted butter later on when I brush it over my rolls, so I don't want to use salted butter throughout. So for this one, you need 2 tablespoons of your butter of choice. I use unsalted, and then you want to melt that in the microwave. Again, don't burn it, but have it at least liquefied, and then pour that in your yeast mixture along with 1 egg, and then mix that together real well. Okay, now in another larger bowl, you're going to add in your flour. You're going to need 2 3/4 cup flour. I like to use unbleached flour to get it as natural as possible from Trader Joe's, but you're welcome to use any type of flour that you'd like. I'm doing this all very slow because for me, I was never good at baking. I'd burn every cookie I made. So the thought of making homemade cinnamon rolls was very intimidating. But once I got this one down, I realized that it's pretty simple, and if I could do it, anybody can do it. So I think step by step and just seeing exactly how it's done is super helpful. I'll add the ingredient list in the description so that you can just screenshot that so you can look at it or write it down. But just for me, when I'm trying to learn to bake something new that I'm usually not professional at yet. I like to see exactly how it's done step by step by someone else. So this might be a little slow, but I'm just doing it because that's the way I would like it. So when I get a recipe that says 2 and 3/4 cup of anything, I try not to keep using my 1/4 cup. I teach the kids like this for math, so I guess it just ingrained in my head. But I'll use 2 1 cups, and then I use 1/2 cup and 1/4 cup just to make it a little bit easier. So that's what I did here. And then to your flour, you're gonna add in your 1 teaspoon of salt. Now you just want to mix that in there. Make sure everything's blended well. And now to your yeast mixture, add in 1/4 cup of sugar and mix that. Now once that's all blended, you're going to slowly pour in your yeast mixture into your dry mix and then stir it all together until you get a real sticky dough. That's once it's sticking to your spoon, that's when you know it's time to use your hands. So you can kind of see here, I should have zoomed in a little better, but at first it's real easy to stir, and then when it gets real tough, that's when you could put it on a surface and knead it out. Okay, as you can kind of see, it got real thick, and now I'm gonna grab my giant cutting board and I'm gonna flour it and pour the dough on top so I can knead it out with my hands. So you're gonna knead this with your hands for about a good 10 minutes or until you get a nice smooth dough texture. And if you're not really used to kneading dough like I wasn't, the easiest explanation I got was just kind of keep folding it over and then flattening it out and then fold it over, flatten it out like I'm doing here. And that will eventually turn into a smooth ball of dough. It is a little bit of a workout, but it's kind of fun. So just sit there and knead, and if it gets too sticky or the dough sticking to your cutting board or your hands, just add a little bit more flour and just keep kneading. You'll know when it's done because everything's all stuck together and you can make a nice smooth ball. Here is my second set of dough. Like I said, I always make 2 batches of this. So I'm gonna try to knead both kind of on and off so they don't dry out sitting here waiting for me. If I had the energy, I'd probably make 3 to 4 batches because that's how much we enjoy this. It lasts about a week in the refrigerator, and then you could just microwave these about 30 seconds and enjoy it with your breakfast or for dessert for the week. But I really like to use these and share them with people in our neighborhood, or if somebody just had a baby, I like to bring them a nice batch of warm cinnamon rolls. It's just they're really good, and it's kind of a lot of work. So if you can make more at once, then I think it's much better to just get it all done in one sitting. Here you can see my first set of dough is all finished. I was able to roll it into a nice smooth ball. You just kind of tuck it all under until the surface looks nice and round, and then we're gonna add that into a lightly oiled bowl. So I just washed the same bowls that I mixed my ingredients in, and then I added a little bit of olive oil, and I kind of mix it around with a paper towel, and then you're gonna add your big dough ball. Just one dough ball per bowl, sorry. So move your dough around in the bowl until it's coated with the oil lightly, and then you just cover that up. You could use like a moist dish towel if you want to. I always just like to cover it real good with some saran wrap just to make sure it's actually covered in there. And then you're going to set that aside and let it rise for at least an hour. Make sure you don't set it on like a oven or anything that's on and it's too warm. Just keep it at room temperature. I try to keep them on the table, and it should at least double in size. You'll definitely be able to tell if the yeast worked. But if you did get the foamy mixture on top when you mixed your warm water, your warm milk, your yeast and sugar, then you know you have good yeast. Okay, so while my dough's rising, I like to make my filling. For your filling, you're going to need 2/3 cup packed brown sugar. If you're making 2 batches, make sure you make 2 separate batches of filling. You're going to need all of it for each batch of cinnamon rolls. So you need the brown sugar, and then 1 tablespoon of cinnamon and 1 teaspoon vanilla extract, and then just mix that all together real well. I definitely don't measure precisely on my cinnamon. As you can see, that was a pretty large scoop. I love the cinnamon inside my cinnamon roll, so if you want to add more or less, you're welcome to. It's not like it's going to ruin the recipe if you have a little extra cinnamon. It actually makes it better to me, but if you want to do it just a minimal amount, then just you can level it off. But for me, I just like to add a little extra in there. Okay, so it's been about an hour. As you can see, the dough is gotten pretty big. See, that's a pretty big piece of dough there. It looks perfect. So I'm just gonna flour my cutting board a little bit more, and then we're gonna add our dough back, and then we're gonna knead that out just a little bit more until it's all the air has gotten out of it. By now your dough should feel much different. It's much softer and smoother after rising. I love how it feels after your dough has risen. It's just like a little pillow. So my camera died in between, but I wasn't able to show you this part. You just want, once you knead out your dough and it's nice and soft and all the air has been released, you can punch it out like I just did there and then knead it out. You're going to roll it out into as much of a rectangle as you can. Mine is more really like an oval. And I also eyeball it, so it's hard to tell you exactly the size, but once you roll it out, you can kind of measure with your hands to see how many strips you would need to make 12 cinnamon rolls. Honestly, I don't always make 12 cinnamon rolls. Sometimes I want to make smaller ones and more of them, so I'll make maybe like 14, 15 cinnamon rolls. Or if you want really big ones, sometimes I'll make 10 cinnamon rolls and just cut them really big. So it's totally up to you. As long as you roll it out around this size, it should come out fine either way. So you just want to roll it into not an even circle, not an even square, but more like a rectangular oval shape. As you see here, it's a little bit tough too to roll it. So for me, I kind of pressed it down a few times. Sometimes I'll just hold the dough in my hands and let it just gravity do its job, and it will pull down, as you can see here. I don't know if I did show that because my camera died, but it gets a little tough. But once you flatten it out a little bit, it's much easier to roll out. So just take your time, do the best you can, and just keep pressing and flattening until the dough gets about as thick as you can see here. And you definitely don't want to roll it out too thin to where every time you touch it, there's a hole in the dough. You don't want it too thin, so you want to make sure it's at least thick enough that when you roll it out, it's going to be thick and there's not going to be any holes or tearing. Right here is kind of what I was talking about. When it gets really hard to stretch it out, I do this with my pizza dough as well. I just kind of hold it up and shake it a little bit until it stretches out. I don't want to do it too much to where there's a hole, but it makes it a whole lot easier than doing the whole way by rolling pin. So that's just one of my little tips. Okay, once you got your dough all rolled out and ready to go, before you add your filling, you're going to want 1/4 cup of butter. I still use unsalted butter for this, so you could use, if you used a stick, just melt it in a bowl in the microwave, or just make sure you don't burn it, but make sure it's liquidy enough that you can just spread it on, and then you can paint the butter evenly on the surface, and then you're going to add your filling evenly over that, and the butter is going to work kind of like a glue to hold it onto the dough. I try not to, like I said, I try not to liquefy the butter. As you can kind of see here, it's still a little bit chunky. It kind of helps to keep the sugar really in place, but you definitely don't want a ice cold butter stick. Once you spread out your topping all evenly along your dough, I like to go in with the cinnamon and just fill in any gaps. If it looks like I'm missing any filling in some places, it should be enough to cover it, but some places are a little thinner than others, and we like our cinnamon rolls just packed with filling. So I just go in with a little bit of cinnamon. I feel like that's a little healthier than sugar, and I just fill in any spot so that you just see a nice thick covering of filling. That's optional, but it's definitely recommended. So this part's a little bit tricky. You're gonna go on the more narrow end, and you're gonna very carefully roll into tight circles so you can roll up your entire piece of dough into one long roll. So you're just going to go slowly from one side to the next. It's hard to do it all at once, so I just do it real slow, and I try to get the dough as tight together as I can. And then if the edges seem like some of the dough is not covering it, I just stretch it out a little bit to make sure it covers the whole end. I mean, you don't have to. You can have the end pieces be a little thinner, but I try to make all the pieces even, and then just try to stretch where it needs to be stretched, and just keep rolling until you've finished your whole sheet of dough. And then that's when we're gonna cut into the individual rolls. I feel like I'm terrible at explaining, so hopefully you guys being able to see me do this is a lot more helpful than my words. Okay, so we got two rolls here. For me, cutting, the way I do it, I take a piece of elastic string. I got this actually in the craft section for bracelets, but it works great for this. You could use floss, but I had a really hard time finding unscented floss, and I definitely don't want to use mint floss because that's going to ruin the flavor. I was even thinking about fishing net, clean fishing net, that would probably work too, but I just found some elastic string in the craft section. I cut a piece and washed it real well just to be sure. And then as you can see here, all you got to do is place it underneath your dough roll and then twist the top and pull until it cuts all the way through and you have a really nice clean cut cinnamon roll. Sometimes it does break because it's really thin and delicate, so you just got to be very careful with how hard you pull it. And then if you need another piece, just go ahead and grab another piece. See, I did break it a few times because I was kind of trying to rush here. But that's okay. You just try again, get another piece. You can always cut it if you want to, but it kind of flattens out your rolls. And I really wanted a nice looking circular cinnamon roll. So you're going to cut these into, you're going to try to get 12. Like I said, if you want fatter ones, you could do less. If you want smaller ones, you could do more. And then you're going to add those to a greased baking dish. And then once you have them all in there, you're going to cover the baking dish again with saran wrap and let that sit for another hour or so, at least, until you see that your cinnamon rolls again got a lot larger. I wouldn't say they totally double in size, but they definitely get quite a bit bigger. I did try doing this quicker and letting it rise for only about 30 minutes, and then when I baked my rolls, they were not as big and juicy as I'd wanted them to be. So don't skip on this step. This is definitely like an all-day thing with making any kind of bread or homemade bakes, baking with yeast and rising. So yes, it's going to take a while, but I like to just do this in between making dinner or take the time while it's rising to make the glaze like we made the filling. But just make sure that you give it time to rise and you will definitely be glad you did because you're going to have nice big juicy cinnamon rolls right in your own kitchen. Okay, so you can see what my baking dishes look like. I have everything all cut. Then I'm just going to cover these up like I said. I try to cover them up real tight so that there's no opening. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just make sure the whole top is covered and then set these aside again about room temperature. Let them rise for at least 1 hour and then they'll be ready for baking. For these rolls, I decided to add in some chopped pecans, and they were so good. My kids don't even like nuts, and I only added it to half of one batch. I should have added it to both, but it came out amazing. And like I said, my kids don't even like nuts, and all of them requested the ones with the pecans. I wasn't sure if I should toast them first, but I wanted to try it out, so I just chopped them up and I smashed them a little bit, as you could see, and then I put them in the oven for just a few minutes to get them a little toasty, and then I added them on top. So once your cinnamon rolls are done rising, they should look bigger like this, and that's when we're gonna add butter over the top. We're gonna add about, let me see, I just melt butter. Honestly, I don't really measure it. Melt enough butter that you can cover every single roll. And for this one, I use pure Irish butter. It's salted, it's fatty, and it's delicious. So you can use unsalted if you'd like to, but for this part, I feel like it's very important to get that flavor in there. So I would use real butter, and then just melts it down and paint over the tops of your cinnamon rolls. Make sure that you get all of them nicely covered. And then if you want to add the pecans after you toasted them for a few minutes, they don't need to be in there too long. You really don't even need to toast them, but I just thought it would be better. So add your pecans, and then you're going to bake your cinnamon rolls in the oven at 375 for about 15 to 20 minutes. It's hard to say the exact amount of time, but when you see them nice and golden on top, you know they're done. They should look like this. You can see the gold in the middle, and they're not doughy. You can check to make sure they're not doughy. And a trick that I learned when baking these cinnamon rolls is put a baking dish underneath your baking dish, like a baking sheet while they're baking, to keep the bottoms from burning. And this has helped every single time. I've never burnt a bottom, and trust me when I say I burn everything. So definitely recommend putting a baking sheet underneath. And then for your glaze, you're gonna need 1.5 cup powdered sugar, 1 teaspoon vanilla, a 1/4 cup of melted butter. Again, I used the pure salted butter for this one, and then about 3 tablespoons
I love
of
you
milk.
so much.
And then you're gonna whisk that all together. If it's too thick, you can add a little more milk, but in my experience, 3 tablespoons is perfect. Again, you can use any kind of milk you'd like. I have 2 bowls. One is for each tray because you definitely don't want to skimp out on your glaze. And then once you let your cinnamon rolls cool, at least maybe 10 to 15 minutes, so they're not scorching hot, but they don't have to be cold, you're going to add your glaze over the top and make sure they're all covered nicely. By now your house should smell heavenly. I usually have neighbors knocking on my door at this point because I like to bake it with the windows open, and it just smells so good. So this is what your finished rolls should look like. Here are the pecans, here are the plain. All of them came out amazing, just like this recipe always does. It's the best one so far, and if you guys try it out, let me know what you think. Let me know how it comes out for you. Like I said, everybody requested the pecan rolls. I've seen pecan sticky roll recipes where they add like a caramel sauce, but honestly, I wouldn't even want to do that because these were super sweet already with just a glaze, and they were so good. So if you try it, let me know what you think. I'm curious to see how it comes out for someone else. And I want to give credit where credit's due. So the original recipe was from somebody I found on YouTube called In the Kitchen with Matt. So I took his recipe, I tweaked it a tiny bit, but all his recipes are amazing. So if you want to look him up, I'll put it in the description as well. And here is the inside of these amazing cinnamon rolls, and I hope you guys enjoy.